Why do I say so it is said? Who wants to explain why I say so it is said? It's true I have an interest in this case at the International Criminal Court, but even without that I make the same point. Who knows why I say genocide, so it is said? Because there's very little internationally respectable academic or other opinion that says it's genocide. It's a terribly serious series of things happening. And genocide, a crime only defined in 1945 or thereabouts, is no different in gravity so far as the victims or the number of the victims or the manner in which they're killed from crimes against humanity or war crimes or ordinary commonplace murders in its killings. So what is it in our modern age that means you, or several of you, could look at Angelina Jolie and George Clooney and say that is all about genocide in Darfur? And can you explain to me why you know about that? And for example, who here knows anything or much, not about Aung San Suu Kyi, but about the crimes that have been going on in Burma for decades? Who knows much about that? You know a bit? A lot? A little bit. And 2. 3. And 4 or 5. But would you, the 5 of you, accept that it has achieved far less prominence than, for example, this conflict? And why is that? Amongst other reasons, it's because it has never been allowed to have a celebrity champion. There are other reasons why nobody wants to, or at least by the big powers, won't allow the Burma issue to be taken as far as other issues are taken, and we can discuss that later. But just bear in mind, as you are considering the role of the law in the resolution of present conflicts, and of course Darfur is before the International Criminal Court, even if the President won't surrender at the moment, remember that there's a high measure of fashion, the political influence of celebrity, and actually there's dependence on genocide as a celebrity crime to get attention where otherwise you might not get it. If you are a victim and you're able to say of your crime against your people, it's genocide, you're more likely to attract attention than if, for exactly the same gravity of offence, it doesn't get characterised in that way. And so, now and in years to come, as you look at what the international community does by one means or another to deal with existing or recently past or long past conflicts, be cautious and bear in mind that there is a measure of fashion that is operating on what is selected that would not apply in, or one would hope would not apply, in a national situation. Before I turn to the next trial, let me just show you a couple of pictures. I think they're out of place really. But there we are. That's in the prison at Scheveningen. You can see Milosevic and various others. Here's another one. All of them are there together. Happy as Larry. Every single participant. Lubčić, Milosevic, Tuta, Alić, Orić, Jelisić, to whom we'll come, and so on. Isn't it funny? Well, it's not funny, actually. Isn't it serious that when conflict is over and people are required to sit together in the same kitchen? Oh, there we are. Let's come to Jelisić, the second trial I did, and a short one, and I'll try and make 3 points about this trial. Jelisić was involved in Brčko, a town in Bosnia that had to be held by the Serbs if there was to be any contiguity between the red parts, which are the Serb-dominated parts of Bosnia, and I suppose ultimately any chance of connecting those parts to Serbia proper. But in any event, the Serbs had to take Brčko, in which they did not have a natural demographic majority. Jelisić, and there's a very disturbing sequence of pictures that, depending on how time goes and your inclination, I'll show you, but not now because it's too destabilizing in a sense. But Jelisić, there he is go, there he is at trial, there he is again at trial. Jelisić was a prime example of somebody who, on all the evidence, had no animosity towards the Muslims he was killing. He killed people for a short period of time, a few weeks, first on the orders of the local police and then pretty much on his own choice at a detention facility. He had no animosity. He'd been recruited, again on all the evidence, only a few days before. He'd been given a uniform and a gun and he became a mass killer. And he, as an individual, was a prime example of how the most ordinary of people, he had very little by way of previous convictions, I think a few check frauds, but nothing else. No violence, nothing. And he became, until he was stopped, a sort of mass killer. And that, of course, is one of the terrible lessons of these conflicts for all of us. The second thing about the Jelisić trial is a topic of general consideration. He was indicted by the then senior prosecutor, Louise Arbour, for this recently minted, or comparatively recently minted, alleged offence of genocide. But he was a single man, quite low down in the management chain. He wasn't a political leader. It's an interesting legal argument. Can somebody a long way down the management chain properly be convicted of genocide when one of the component elements of genocide is the intention to destroy an ethnic group in part, in whole or in part? A state of mind that has to be proved in the offender. Well now, Jelisić had cooperated with the powers of law by confessing. Because of the photographs that had been taken of his killings, he had little choice, but he confessed it was him. He confessed that he was going to try and wipe out all the Muslims in the location, leaving only a few left to do the cleaning, things like that. He provided the most wonderful evidence against himself for this issue of genocide against a low-ranking individual to be tried. And Louise Arbour pressed ahead with the trial. Enter the judges. They said, informally, behind the scenes, please don't go against him for genocide. He pleaded guilty to killings in other ways, crimes against humanity, war crimes. And the judge said, oh please, please, don't bother with the genocide trial. We'd like to keep that for a more sensational, a bigger defendant in due course. And Louise Arbour said, no. This is a legal issue which should not be affected or infected by small p or even large p political considerations. And she pressed ahead. When we reached the end of the prosecution's case, the chamber announced that it was going to give judgment, and it was clear that they were going to acquit him of genocide. We argued that they shouldn't do that, and that there was plenty of evidence to go forward. They had none of it. And they came into court, and they gave a judgment which was pretty well incomprehensible, acquitting him of genocide, and refused to allow me to speak, because I said, please, can we argue against this? You know, please. No, I was told very firmly to sit down. I had no choice. And the high point of my advocacy skills on that day was to throw my spectacles in a somewhat theatrical way onto the bench, in the best I could do for a reflection of how I felt about the judges without actually being in prison. They ran from the bench. And later the Court of Appeal said they were wrong. They should have allowed us to argue the point. There was enough evidence to go ahead on the crime of genocide. Whether he would have been convicted or not, we don't know. So here's a very general point. I discussed it with one of your faculty members last night. To what extent should political considerations of any kind enter into the judicial process when it has an international dimension, when it would not arise, if you think of a parallel situation, in a national setting? And of course, by the time this decision had been made, in fact, the next prosecutor, Del Ponte, was in office, and she was absolutely political in every way, political and publicity focused. And I think that had she been there a little bit earlier, she would have stopped us going on appeal on this case, but she just didn't quite arrive in time, and we managed to get it to appeal with the results that I've given you. I think that's 2 points about Jelisić, and if we look at the pictures later, then we'll look at those and see what they help us with. But a very interesting case. Let me now turn to the case of, what happened? I'd done these 2 cases, I completed these 2 cases. Neither of them brought any particular international or even national interest. From my point of view, remember, I'm an ordinary lawyer, still am, and it had been satisfying to do 2 jobs which were interesting and difficult. I hoped bringing in broadly respectable records of work done. Perhaps come back to that phrase a little later. At least I hope that's what I did. And I returned to England expecting to get on with my ordinary domestic work. In the event they arrested Milosevic, and because I was perhaps the only person who had the relevant experience of prosecuting